word radical means to go to the root, creating the Washington State Bank, bringing our billions home, economic alternatives. So it's not just a sessions about we're complaining about different things, but we're actually coming up with some possible solutions. And there's plenty of money about that, and for these solutions. Because one of the things you're constantly going to be told, well, I sympathize with you, but we don't have the money. I'm on your side, but we don't have the resources. And that's not true. Cindy talked about some of the issues, actually, the money going to Israel for basically repressing people. And one of the things we're told is that there's no articulated demand from people who occupy nationwide, and there's no articulated demand from people like us in these particular rooms, and that's not true. If we take a look at the various websites, there are a lot of articulated demands about what's going on. And we're especially told that that there's no money, again, coming back to that. But there's plenty of money, but it's been really confiscated from the working class. And I like to use the word working class as opposed to middle class, because the word middle class has been used by a lot of politicians and also some progressive people sometimes too. But basically middle class people are just better paid working class people. And so if you sell your labor power, like I'm a college professor, but I need my check on the 10th and the 25th. If I don't get my check on the 10th and 25th, I'm reminded very quickly that I'm a working class person without a job. So it's good if you're a working class person, it's better to get a better wage than a lower wage, but you are a working class person. And that's why we should identify with people who are also poor, who are those of us who are actually have reasonably well-paying jobs. But the money is being spent nationally on illegal wars. We all know that. Illegal and immoral wars. And there's a direct connection between the cost of the illegal wars in Afghanistan and Iraq to the current economic crisis that exists. So far, the wars have cost $1.3 trillion, $1.3 trillion, according to the National Priority Projects. And people should actually go to that website, National Priority Project, because it actually gives you direct connection, the exact cost of the war up to the present time, the exact cost, and also what could have been done with the money. And the projected cost of the wars, because we have to take care of veterans, we have to sort of, which we do, and we have to take care of costs in the future, are $3 to $4 trillion, because we're doing it on borrowed money. And so $3 to $4 trillion. So these wars will continue to cost us money unless we actually alter the fabric of how we actually allocate resources in the future. And the cost of Washington State alone, because the National Priority Project breaks it down by per capita in the United States, and each state, of course, contributes a significant amount of money, borrowed money. The cost of Washington State has been $29 billion, $29 billion for Washington State for the Iraq and Afghanistan. And according to the National Priorities Project, because they have charts about this, that would have paid the cost, we've already spent that money, that would have paid the cost for enough money for a 4-year college education for all incoming freshman classes at the University of Washington for the next 228 years. 228 years. Now when I read that the first time, I thought, that can't be right. But what I did was I looked at the cost of going to University of Washington, the projected cost in their catalog, how much it costs for a student to come in, what's the size of the freshman class, and they're correct, and not adjusted for inflation. So if actually you spread it out throughout the state of Washington, you could probably say, well, it's only going to pay for the cost of every single student in the state of Washington for the next 50 or 60 years. That's the money we've already spent. So when politicians tell you there's no money, that's false. It's a lie. So there's plenty of money that's available. This is already money that's being spent. We're not even talking about raising taxes at this particular point in time. But there does need to be taxes on the top 1% and on the rich. I was just looking at the tax tables for the 20th century. Between 1947 and 1967, the standard of living for the average American actually doubled in real dollar terms, 47 to 67. The standard of living actually doubled in real dollar terms for 80%, actually for almost over 100% of Americans, but for the bottom 80%, which is the general population. The tax rate in 1947 was 80%. The tax rate in 1979 was about 81%. In the 1950s, it went up to 91%. That is the top marginal rate. The top marginal rate now is 35%. And that went down under the second George Bush. First it went under Reagan, then it goes under Bush, and then it goes under the second George Bush. And so the amount of money that we're talking about, that's the national debate last year to raise taxes for the top 1%, was to bring it back to what it was before Bush came and the second Bush came into power, which would have made it 39%. There is so much money which is available. You've heard, for example, talking about the top 1%, and we are the 99%. The top 1% control close to 50% of the financial wealth of the country. The bottom 80%, which is the general population, have only 7% of the wealth of the country. And the bottom 50% have negative wealth. That is, they owe more than they actually own. There are some people in the bottom half who have a little bit of housing, a little bit of cars, etc. But as a group, they owe more than they actually have. So they own, as a group, nothing. However, it's worse than that. At least 1% is approximately 3 million people in the United States. However, there are 413 billionaires in the United States. These 413 individual people own $1.5 trillion, or 10% of the economy of the United States. So 413 people control 10% of the economy of the United States. So there's plenty of resources which are available, plenty of money which is available. There's plenty of money in this state which is available. So it's not a question that there's a lack of money. In fact, a recent report this last week indicated the top 1% income went up 15% again. So there's plenty of resources. These people have more resources than basically the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. These people have more resources than the kings and queens of Europe in the Middle Ages. So it's not a question of getting rid of them as people. It's a question of getting rid of that class as a class in American society and global society. But there's plenty of resources. But we don't even have to have a revolution. If we raise the tax rate to what it was under Ronald Reagan, we'd have a surplus. Under Ronald Reagan, we would have a surplus today with the amount of money which is available. So finally, I'd like to close with a couple of words from a couple of great African Americans in the 19th and 20th century that are relevant to the 21st century today. Frederick Douglass pointed out, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Progress precedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And Malcolm X pointed out that we are not a minority that needs to beg. We are a majority that can demand. And I think we need to demand that there be resources being spent on the American people. We need to demand that the working class, not just the middle class, basically get their just dues. We need to demand that children be allowed to go to school, K-12. Demand that people will be allowed to go to college. And there's plenty of money at the national level, and there's plenty of money at the state level. It's a question of how the resources are allocated. Thanks. We're going to let you now for about 5 or 7 minutes to take maybe a few questions. And we're going to have more, obviously, all day long. You have time for a conversation. And then in about 5 minutes, we'll talk about the logistics of the place.
Larry, you talked about the resources of the wealthy, and yet you're talking about the tax rate on income. Do you favor a tax on wealth? For example, Germany and France have and do have taxes on wealth. And do you favor a tax on the transfer of wealth? Currently, we only have taxes on tangible assets in the United States, things like real estate and factories. We have no taxes on intangible assets, intellectual property, stock, patents, software. Do you favor taxing that property, being that that is the area where most wealth is held in the United States and most wealth is created in the United States? Also, do you favor a tax on the transfer of intangible assets? Today, we tax the transfer of real estate, but we don't tax the transfer of stock. The European Union is proposing a tax on the transfer of stock. Do you favor that kind of tax?
Well, in a word, yes. No. I'm glad you brought that up because, again, there's wealth and income are two different things. When I gave you the tax rates, that's on the income that people get every single year. But also there's an incredible amount of wealth. Actually, that's what the 413 billionaires actually have. And there are And it's important that you mention these countries because these countries are capitalist countries. So even within the capitalist structure, there are ways to actually stop absolute poverty in the United States and poverty around in the developed countries. And then we should do that within the next year if we build a movement to get there. And then we should actually be building a movement to try to transform society in the long run. And the long run shouldn't be that long, but you're absolutely right, and thanks for the numbers. And also to the Bring the Billions Home campaign too, there's a lot of literature for that too.